Hi, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Terrifying Trios. Since March is Women's History Month, this time our topic is sisters. Some sisters are born, some are chosen, but the protagonists of these films and book all have a unique bond that keeps them connected, both in life and in death. Content warning. The following movies and book contain scenes of graphic violence, including death by stabbing, death by gunshot, and more. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. And as always, spoilers ahead. Our first film this time is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Celebrating its 65th birthday this year, this film is a classic, and even those who haven't seen this movie are familiar with the iconic shower scene. However, this film is more than that brutal moment. It's also a taut thriller, and as you watch, your unease grows. You, the viewer, have knowledge that the characters don't, but you still eagerly follow them to the terrible truth of the Bates Motel. We first meet Marion Crane, a secretary who works in Phoenix, Arizona. She has met her boyfriend, Sam Loomis, for a romantic rendezvous in a hotel room. The two want to get married, but Sam is going through an expensive divorce. Sam, it should be noted, doesn't live in Phoenix, but rather Fairvale, California. Back at work in Phoenix, Sam's predicament makes Marion think. A wealthy client of her boss, he's in real estate, pays $40,000 in cash, and Marion is instructed to take the money to the bank and deposit it. And she starts to. But then she thinks about how that money could change her life, and Sam's. For context, adjusted for inflation, $40,000 in 1960 is equivalent to over $400,000 in 2025. So, Marion quickly drives home, packs a few things, and leaves town with the stolen money. As Marion drives, her mind begins to swirl with the possibilities of what might happen next. At first, she imagines arriving at Sam's place in California, the surprise and delight he might feel. But then she begins to imagine being caught with the cash. Increasingly paranoid, and the way that people act around Marion in this film, you can hardly blame her. She sells her car in Bakersfield, gets a new one, then continues driving. As a viewer, you get the sense that, ordinarily, Marion, young and beautiful, would attract only positive attention. But a police officer seems suspicious of her and actually follows her car for some time. Part of the reason that this movie gets in your head is that you're seeing things from Marion's perspective. People seem to watch her because she feels she's being watched. They seem to act as though she's guilty of something because she knows she is. Later that night, after hours of driving, Marion's eyes are getting heavy. It's begun to rain, and she realizes she has to stop before she can reach Sam in Fairvale. It's then that she sees the lighted sign of the Bates Motel. So she parks her new car and rents a room for the night. While checking in, she meets Norman Bates. He lives with his mother in the house on the hill above the motel, and he invites Marion, who isn't using her real name for obvious reasons, to eat dinner with him in the office. While waiting in the motel office, Marion overhears Norman arguing with his mother about his dinner plans. He returns, and the two talk. Norman's hobby is taxidermy, and so viewers get some unsettling close-ups of various stuffed creatures inside the motel. Marion, after Norman mentions his mother's poor health, suggests that they might both be better off if she were in some kind of institution where she could be cared for. But Norman insists that Mrs. Bates would never harm anyone. And besides, he says, a boy's best friend is his mother. After dinner, Marion goes to her motel room. She plans to return to Phoenix and give the money back the following day. However, before heading to the shower, she hides the money, realizing that such a large amount of cash should be secured as much as she can within her luggage. But while Marion is showering, someone, we never see this figure, pulls back the curtain and kills her. This scene, in which we understand that Marion is stabbed repeatedly, is a wonder of editing. As the violins of the soundtrack reach their famous shrieking pitch, we see the water turn dark. We know blood when we see it, even in a movie without color. And Marion falls, pulling the shower curtain down with her. Again, we never see her nude or any actual stabbing. The motion of the knife and her screams tell us everything we need to know. I'm all for gore, especially the outlandish, comedic sort, but the understatement of black and white film brutality has a wonderful artistry about it. Soon, Norman appears to check on Marion, and instead finds her body. He is clearly alarmed, and turns off the shower. It's already washed the blood in the tub down the drain. Then quickly works to clean up the scene. He puts Marion's corpse and her luggage into her car, and under the cover of night, pushes the vehicle into a swamp on the Bates property. It would seem that Marion's murder has been perfectly concealed, and that might be true if it weren't for the stolen money. Next, we meet Marion's sister, Lila. Note that this film is celebrated for the misdirection of having the leading lady killed in the first act, so the audience spends the rest of the film wondering how her murder will be solved. Lila goes to meet Sam in Fairvale a week after Marion disappears. Obviously, she wants to know what he knows about her sister. But Sam doesn't know anything, and he and Lila are both surprised by the appearance of a private investigator named Sam Arbogast. Arbogast has been hired to find the missing $40,000, and while trying to determine Marion's whereabouts, he stops at the Bates Motel. Norman is, for reasons obvious to the viewer, nervous. Arbogast doesn't immediately jump to, "This man is covering up a murder," but he's certain that Norman knows something, and his suspicions are confirmed when he sees Marion's handwriting in the guest book at the motel. Next, the PI asks to speak with Mrs. Bates, but Norman insists that she couldn't possibly be interviewed, given her health issues. So, Arbogast pretends to leave, makes a quick phone call to update Sam and Lila on his progress, then sneaks back to the house behind the Bates Motel. He searches for Mrs. Bates, and then a slim figure stabs him at the top of a staircase, killing him. When Sam and Lila don't hear more from the private investigator, they decide to search for Marion themselves. Outside the Bates Motel, Sam catches a glimpse of Mrs. Bates in a window of the house, but he only sees her silhouette. By this time, you may be wondering why we've only heard this character speak and why we've never gotten a good look at her, and the local sheriff is good enough to explain. Mrs. Bates died of strychnine poisoning 10 years ago in a murder-suicide with her lover. Obviously, this just leaves Sam and Lila with more questions. Why was Arbogast planning to talk to Mrs. Bates if she's dead? And who did Sam see in the window of the Bates house? Determined to find the truth about what happened to Marion, the pair go inside the Bates Motel. Sam talks with Norman, keeping him occupied, and Lila heads up the hill to the house. Soon, Norman becomes suspicious and hits Sam, knocking him out. Luckily, Lila has already searched upstairs, so when she sees Norman racing back to the house, she's able to hurry downstairs. In the fruit cellar, Lila sees a woman sitting with her back to the door. She approaches the woman, saying, "Mrs. Bates?" Then she turns the chair around and finds that the gray hair she was looking at is perched atop a skull. Mrs. Bates did die a decade ago, and Norman used his skills as a taxidermist to essentially mummify her, so now desiccated skin clings to the remains of her face, her eyes long gone. Lila screams. She is nearly attacked by Norman, who we now see wearing a wig and dressed in his mother's clothes, but Sam arrives in time to stop him. The movie's denouement proceeds with Sam and Lila at the local police station, where a psychiatrist explains that the quote-unquote murder-suicide of Mrs. Bates and her lover was really Norman's doing. He killed the pair in a jealous rage, but after his mother's death, he felt such guilt that he kept her body and moved her throughout the house, as though she were still alive and an invalid. He also developed an alternate personality, the domineering mother. The mother personality would take over whenever Norman felt attracted to a woman. Now we know that before Marion, Norman killed 2 other women. We see Norman in custody, smiling serenely. The mother personality has taken over, and now there seems to be nothing left of Norman. All of this might sound like pseudo-psychology to the modern viewer, but for a film made in 1960, the film takes pains to try and give logical, scientific explanations for Norman's behavior, and to explain that Norman dressing as his mother does not mean he's a transvestite, This is not really about sex or sexuality, even though feelings of attraction can awaken Mother. The alternate personality was really about power and control. Meanwhile, Mother says that Norman murdered those people, and that she would never do such a thing. Why, she wouldn't even hurt a fly. At the same time, we see Marion's car being pulled out of the swamp, and the film ends. Psycho is a fascinating movie, and even decades after its release, even knowing the plot, its imagery still has the power to shock viewers. This exemplifies why Hitchcock is a legend. He knew how to keep the audience on edge, and every element of this film, the music, the way shots were composed, the sets, and blocking, heightens the tension. I give this film 6 murder victims out of 6. Our next film is 2024's Oddity, a film set and produced in Ireland. First, we meet Danny, who lives in a remote house with her husband, Ted, who works nights at a nearby mental hospital. We encounter Ivan, an orderly at the hospital, who curtly orders a patient back inside, and then Danny and Ted talk on the phone, agreeing that they should invite Danny's sister for dinner soon. In the old, stately house, which the couple is remodeling, we see that there is a tent set up downstairs, as well as a camera, which takes photos at certain intervals. Danny and Ted wish each other good night, ending the call with, "I love you," on each end. And that night, while Danny is home alone, one of Ted's patients, a man named Olin, comes to the door. Danny doesn't open the door, but Olin looks through the opening and insists that he saw someone moving inside the house. We see Danny considering whether or not to unlock the door, and then the scene changes. We next meet a man whose room is full of art. It's nighttime, and he hears a terrifying racket. Something that we, the audience, can't see comes into his room, but leaves, and the frightened man emerges from his hiding place under the bed. We later learn that this is the halfway house where Olin lived, and the second man finds Olin's body on the floor. Then the opening credits roll. In the city of Cork, we meet Danny's blind twin sister, Darcy, who runs the Cabinet of Curiosities shop her mother left her. While many of these items are doubtless antiques, it turns out that this is also a shop full of cursed objects. A year after Danny's death, Ted stops into the shop to give Darcy something. It's the false eye that belonged to Olin, the man believed to have murdered Danny. This is how we learn that Darcy has a gift. If she touches an object, she can know things about the person it belonged to, even after they're dead. Before Ted leaves, 2 things happen. Darcy shows him a bell that is cursed by a bellman, who, she explains, wasn't a very nice man in life. Now, in death, if you ring the bell, he runs to you and kills you. Ted, being a doctor and a man of science, suggests ringing the bell. Logically, this is the easiest way to see if the story of this curse is true. But Darcy is not amused. The last 2 people to ring the bell really did die. Second, the pair chat and agree that they should have dinner soon, since the anniversary of Danny's death is just a week away. However, Ted says he won't be available on the anniversary itself. He'll be working, and his girlfriend is staying with him at the house. Darcy is surprised that Ted has moved on so quickly, but he tells her that his girlfriend is a pharmaceutical rep at the hospital, who was a friend before Danny died, and after, quote, "Yana was there for me," end quote. The next time we see Ted, he's awakening in his house, and he goes downstairs to find Yana, who tells him that she never sleeps well when he's working the night shift. He insists that soon a more senior doctor will retire, and he'll have regular daytime hours. In the meantime, though, Yana wants them to stay at her apartment in Cork, and Ted agrees. Then Yana shows him something strange. On the digital camera that belonged to Danny, there are lots of photos that she took. But Yana took one the night before, and it looks as though Danny is in the photo, her face just barely visible in shadow. Ted suggests that this is just a double exposure, which I don't think is a thing with digital cameras, and that there must be a logical explanation. Then the mail arrives, and with it, a wooden trunk. Inside the trunk is a life-size wooden man, or golem, as the Wikipedia description of this film refers to it. And who should arrive in a taxi not long after but Darcy. Ted is surprised, and Yana is less than thrilled to have her boyfriend's dead wife's sister just arrive unannounced. In this scene, Darcy's blindness seems like an advantage. Instead of exchanging awkward looks with her would-be hosts or witnessing their nonverbal discomfort, she simply insists that, since she's here already, pointing out that Ted did in fact invite her, even though the date was left unclear, she would like to stay. So, Ted goes to work, and Yana prepares for her overnight trip to the city. After Ted's departure, we see him at the hospital, looking at the art done by Olin's roommate. One of the pictures has the same terrifying face as the wooden dummy. Meanwhile, back at the house, Yana can't find her keys. At one point, frustrated, Yana asks Darcy, "Have you seen them?" Darcy reacts with the silence this question deserves, and Yana, realizing what she said, walks away. When it's clear that she won't be leaving anytime soon, Darcy and Yana talk. Darcy seems interested in when exactly Yana and Ted got together, and she explains how she knows, after touching Olin's eye, that Olin was not her sister's killer. Yana is skeptical, but there's not much she can do in this situation, though after Darcy falls asleep, she does get curious about the wooden man. Its terrifying visage aside, and the fact that Darcy says she didn't remove it from the trunk, Yana notices something interesting. There are 5 holes in the back of the dummy's head. Grabbing a pair of surgical tweezers, I guess Ted or Yana brought some home, Yana removes several objects from inside the holes, including photos of Danny and Darcy, and a vial of what looks to be blood. At this point, Darcy wakes and orders Yana to put the items back where she found them. Yana does so, and quickly retreats upstairs. She's already been startled by the wooden man seemingly looking up at her while she was on her phone on the floor above, so she's clearly ready to be done with the creepy portion of her evening. In the room she shares with Ted, Yana once again looks through the images on Danny's digital camera. There's a video she watches, in which Ted and Danny are in the tent where Danny died. Ted is freezing, his whole face covered by the hood of his jacket, while Danny deems the situation rather romantic. At least, that's what happens the first time Yana watches the video. When she looks at it again, Ted has been replaced by a horrible specter of Danny. Danny's ghost is in the room, too, and she tells Yana to run. Downstairs, Yana briefly tries to wake Darcy, but Darcy doesn't respond. And in the box that the wooden dummy arrived in, Yana finally finds her car keys. So she leaves the house and drives away without further mishap. Soon after, Ted returns to the house, and Darcy confronts him. She knows, from touching Olin's eye, that Ted was responsible for Danny's death. He'd gotten together with Yana and decided that if he wasn't to lose the house in the divorce, Danny would have to die. So, Ted had Ivan the orderly at the hospital, who we met in Act 1, kill Danny. Olin, before being released from the facility, overheard them discuss the murder plot, and that's why he showed up at the house the night Danny died. He was trying to warn her. Ted tries to deny this, saying that he can talk to the investigator in charge of the case and get Darcy proof of his innocence. Before leaving again, he leaves his cell phone behind and insists that when the phone rings, Darcy should pick it up. Alone in the dark house, Darcy doesn't immediately react when Ted's phone eventually rings. She knows what she saw in her vision regarding Olin's innocence, and she doesn't trust Ted, for obvious reasons, but eventually she moves quickly toward the phone and falls through the trap door in the floor, which Ted had previously removed. Darcy falls to the stone floor a story below, not yet dead, but fatally injured. Ivan the orderly arrives next, and he talks with Ted about his missing phone, saying that it's broken, clearly beyond repair. This is, of course, a conversation about Darcy, not a cell phone. It's at this point that the wooden man, under Darcy's command, comes after Ivan. The golem attacks him, but before Ivan can be killed, Darcy dies from her injuries, and the wooden man stops moving. Next, Ivan wakes up in the hospital where he previously worked. He's now shackled to a bed, and Ted explains that, of course, he can't let Ivan leave and try and tell his side of the whole story of the dead sisters. Ivan needs to disappear, or it will look as though Ted is, quote, bad at his job, unquote. Then he leaves and allows a man we've only caught a glimpse of before to enter Ivan's room. This particular patient turns out to be a cannibal, and we see him bite into one of Ivan's exposed toes before the scene cuts away. Back at the house, Ted has clearly tried to contact Yana. She has left him a message in turn saying that they're through. He needs to stop calling her. And also, why is he still living in a house where 2 women died horribly? In these last few moments of the film, Ted receives a package in the mail. It's the bell that Darcy showed him in her shop. Ted resists for several seconds, but of course, he doesn't believe in supernatural nonsense. He burned the wooden man, so really, how could it have done anything to Ivan? Ted rings the bell and waits. For a moment, he thinks he hears something, but perhaps it's just the old house settling. He smiles slightly, and then as the shot widens, we the audience see that, unbeknownst to Ted, the ghoulish bellhop is standing behind him, just waiting. This movie is a delightfully haunting, pun intended, tale of sisters staying connected, even when one has died. A phrase that both Danny and Darcy utter at times is, "We are connected." And while this is true via a phone message in Act 1, by the end of the film, the words mean something weightier. Though both sisters die because of one man, thanks to Darcy's abilities, and the wooden man, it's clear that justice, while slow to arrive, finds the murderer in the end. Sometimes murderous ghosts are the solution, not the problem, in a horror movie. I give this film 5 wooden head holes out of 5. Our book this time is Sadako-san and Sadako-chan, written and illustrated by Aya Tsutsumi. Sadako-san is the famed murderous ghost from the Ringu series of films and other media. She appears in an apartment one day and meets a little girl who shares her name. The young girl explains that her mother keeps her locked away, fearing that she, like the original Sadako, is the manifestation of a terrible curse. Instead of killing the girl, because this is a horror comedy manga, Sadako-san and Sadako-chan become friends. While discussing the idea of curses one day, which the younger Sadako doesn't really understand since she's literally 5 years old, the elder Sadako explains that due to the switch from CRT to LCD TVs, she has trouble cursing people nowadays. After all, it was a lot easier to climb through a boxy CRT TV. Sadako-chan explains that most people don't really watch much TV anymore. They tend to watch videos on their phones. So, if Sadako-san wants to curse people, she needs to modernize. That's why Sadako-chan suggests they start a YouTube channel together. The comedy element here is, soon, the elder Sadako is too busy with making fun videos to actually curse or kill anyone. The horror here is understated. While Sadako-san certainly looks frightening, she is disarmed by Sadako-chan's overtures of friendship. The young girl, while perhaps not abused by her mother, has clearly been neglected, to the point that she's just happy to have someone to talk to and spend time with, even though that someone is a formerly homicidal ghost. The pair even team up with another content creator to make videos. This manga is for anyone who enjoyed Ringu, but wished that the ghoulish Sadako might perhaps find happiness someday, in spite of her curse. Having the 2 title characters look so similar, and eventually behave as sisters, provides a nice found family dynamic. As I read more horror manga, I appreciate how comfortably comedic scenes and terror can work together. After all, the horror here lies in what has happened to the main characters in the past. In the present, having found each other, things quickly improve for both of the Sadakos, because in a story like this, each one simply needed someone to see them for who they really are, and not get stuck thinking about curses, real or imagined. Whether biological or forged through circumstance, sisterhood is a special bond. While sisters can grow apart at times, they can also reconnect through anything from a terrible mystery to sheer proximity. And as the horror genre demonstrates in the 3 tales I just discussed, the connection that sisters share doesn't end in death. Even when one is alive and one is dead, there's still the potential for a closeness that persist whether you believe in ghosts or not. After all, a haunting doesn't have to involve a literal spirit. When someone you love dies, an echo remains, and sometimes it's impossible to ignore the fact that dead is not the same as gone. And in some cases, that can be a comforting thought. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another terrifying trio.